Hello everyone, my name is Wade the Wallaby. Today we'll be talking about the werewolf spaceplane, which you probably heard around my channel. I analyzed most of the parts and I'm ready to give you almost the final, preparation. Now obviously you probably would notice some of my videos don't make no sense. I'll try to make sure I get the details of this thing without using anything else. Continuing on with that subject, I begun with the most interesting fact of the werewolf space plane. Over the past hundreds, or I should say years, discovering most of hold on a second. We're not going to go too far back then. We're going to stay about maybe around 19. Okay, never mind. We all know what happened if you're a elite astronomer, probably like me. Well, I'm not like elite or like at least historian. You would have known the last time that a spacecraft at least with the threshold on the surface, or at least went there, was Israel's lander, which wasn't successful. However, the only one that was successful, which was China's moon landing with its rover. That's all we got. We have no manned missions. And that is why the werewolf spaceplane has to be a cheap, reliable system. I have explained what the engines are going to be like. I was going to use a standard documentary term, but due to the fact of, I should say, uncircumstances, I can't do that. It's like a narrator style. I've been trying to figure out, I wanted to have a good opening scene when I open up a stream, but I always forget as soon as I start to stream, I'm already messed it up and I have to basically go to old-fashioned me. I wanted to have an old style background. And since of course I have low budget and of course I have absolutely no records or any others, that's how I became this ridiculous person. I mean, I have the money, but I'm just too lazy and I'm just, this is it. And streaming doesn't use memory on any device. Since I use the laptop right now, that's it. Now, obviously, now I feel kind of a bit ridiculous, an embarrassment that I don't talk about it. I always talk about something else, and this is the problem about these streams. You get the idea, and I understand that. Yeah, I had some ideas for the werewolf spaceplane. Now, just to make sure the werewolf spaceplane has backups, I added some backups. Now, once the orange tank reaches into orbit and can be used as a station that has 4 docking ports, the docking ports are going to be very small, but they'll be basically having piping. And what's going to do is it's going to refuel. Not like, that movie called Space Buddies, which basically they went absolutely. When I basically became a elite historian and of course physics and stuff, which I didn't learn about physics at school. How I didn't learn about physics? At home. I basically, because they didn't have any careers for my autism at that. They said it was boring, but you could possibly learn about some physics around here. I mean, it's all around you. How am I standing here? Well, because of Earth's gravity, of Earth's mass. What I thought was Earth had a magnetic field thing and it was like but no, it's because of mass. And if you were on any other object, it would be the same thing. Like an asteroid, but it would be less, which you basically will take a while for you to touch down or just at least jump and you escape or whatever. Or if it was a super Earth, you'll be crushed or you'll be basically be very heavy. And if the species was, if a planet, I'm way out of subject right now. I'm supposed to stand right next to, I have the backup. So I had an idea for it. if there's an emergency for the wearer space plane, well, when the docking port is failed, there are airlocks at the side, and of course the sketch, which I should update the sketch so we'll have these features. The nose cone can come off and come back on, and it will extend out a temporarily emergency refuel. And the reason why for this is in case if the docking port is failed, this can extend outward. So for about maybe at least let's say, well, whatever how long it's going to be, it should be around the same time where it's going to be. And now, of course, you probably don't know what I'm talking about if you're new, which, I mean, that's practically normal. But you can look at my playlist. I should moon playlist, obviously, or moon missions, and you might find some of my videos on there and actually have a replica before, streams started to change and stuff. And you get an idea. It will look like I even had sketches, but until my other account got terminated for some apparent reason, then that sketch, well, I do have it on, in the drawing. So I was thinking about updating it as well as, helping it. Now, we have talked about the engines, so we're going to go back to the emergency procedures. Reason why is because this thing is going to be a citizen. Now, remember, if you're on the airliner, there usually are procedures, but in a sentence that so if you're a normal airplane, standards are, I basically have been on the airplane, but that was in 2014, which I didn't know about space like what I know right now. Like in 2016, no, about like 2017, I got to a point where actually, no, take that back. I knew about orbit mechanics in 2012, which that is extremely long. Well, actually, I think it was 2012. Well, whatever it was, I remember me getting Kerbal Space Program, so it had to be at least a long time ago. So I knew about orbit mechanics very long ago, but I didn't know much about the spacecraft's history. And then once, I learned about some of it, like YouTubers like Reserve Over the Filmmaker, basically went to detail, and I basically learned some of the history, and that's how I got to this place, to understand how spacecrafts in all sorts of shapes and sizes work. And that's how I got to have this werewolf space plane. It's not because of replace. Now, let's just have a 737, Boeing 737, all right? We have a standard 737, which, is standard, just an old model, all right? And actually just around here where it was maybe about 2000, or at least where it was built, or at least where it was, functioning like today, maybe about 2015. Let's just say the airliner was about 2015 years old, all right? It was basically made in I don't know. Okay, so simulation, play Flight Simulator X, you would have definitely X-Wing, which possibly X-Wing or X-Pilot. X-Pilot or something like that. And they do have space planes. They did have the space shuttle in there, if I'm getting right. You can, so basically there are like that, but it does get you to it's just the space shuttle. And however, Orbiter does explain more than that, because it does have, of course, wing damage, but of course, a space shuttle in Orbiter 2016 is indestructible. So yeah, and the wing and the landing gear are freaking rocks. Yeah, but they're on the Vanguard. It's just you have to be gentle, but maybe because I got very easy for landing, and eventually I got too lazy just to land on the runway. Now that sounds ridiculous and unrealistic, but hey, this is just a simulation. I'm just too lazy. So I land in the fake water, because in Orbiter 2016, the water, there is some add-ons to make it more realistic, but you'll just stick like that. And I have the Vanguard, but of course, the reason why I do that, I have landed in rough terrain and survived. And, I didn't have to, I always kept Scram, and I used Scram actually on Mars. Now, Okay, so we're gonna move the werewolf space plane temporarily because I gotta tell you something. If you guys played Orbiter Flight Simulator, you would have definitely, or 2016, you would definitely have trouble flying in Mars atmosphere, or at least getting scram. It's it's so easy to get scram to work. Now, of course, a lot of YouTubers maybe they didn't do it because it was unrealistic, but to me it was very efficient and it worked so well. So the only way you can test scram is you at least, well, on Earth, the strong gravity, of course, but that's the problem. But the atmosphere is thin, so when you reduce the gravity, it basically keeps it, well, for some reason it's just perfect. That allows you to have that scramjet going, and once it gets going higher enough, at least, Mach 2 point, baby in there, Mach 2 point of something, or I mean, rather than that, or 3, I forgot. And then once you reach that, the scram, you can't do scram in the Earth's too thick atmosphere. They will work really high. And yeah, so anybody that has trouble with that, and if I didn't get detail, there's a lot of YouTubers, maybe a few. Try David Cathany. He does a lot of explaining, and he will teach you a lot of things, how to fly, or even just go around. Or if you're just playing Kerbal, and because Kerbal is kind of different because you built your spacecraft easily. You can build your quote unquote spacecraft or spaceplane on orbit 2016, but it takes like 104 dash. You have commas here. Make sure to color programming, and basically it's not like 100% because I have no idea how it worked. You have C, and then you okay. So we're gonna grab the werewolf spaceboat concept. So when there's an emergency, I do have some ridiculous emergency maneuvers, which basically, if there is once the werewolf spaceplane has trouble, it will stage anytime because it has aerospike engines. It's able to use thrust. Now, in one terms, the seats can actually adjust so the G-forces are less, or I should say, will work for the autopilot to position themselves so they will basically rotate where the G-forces are less, or at least where torque, or I should say, the bank. So when it banks too hard, they will eventually try to move towards it so to reduce it, or I don't know, but just make sure that the systems don't get too much stress, because the werewolf spaceplane is in a position that the aerospike engines will try to, once they will fold up, and because of that, well, in theory, I'm not sure, this might tear it up, but it will try to go like this, basically, and it will rotate this way because it does have these aside, so it basically does a, not barrel, but it does a backflip, and it will turn to go back to the runway. Basically the easiest way, but of course you got to bank to where the equator is, so you at least have, well, I never thought about this until right now. So when you're like somewhere around like up in the poles, you most likely don't want to use the werewolf spaceplane because you're really far. Most likely like around Florida, where the equator is most close, and the airports around there will most likely be like around the United States is fine, but like in Canada, it would get very serious, be very expensive because but if it's like right equator, it's just like, bam, you're up there. So I forgot about that because you have to have an angle or AOA, attack of, or something like that. I don't know much about AOA. That's pretty new to me, and it's really, really focused on, I believe yeah. They don't show that. Now, when I start learning about APU, or I should say, hydraulic base of this hydraulic fluid, my dad said it's basically fuel that uses power. Basically, it turns on and you have power. But Dad probably didn't understand because APU on Orbiter 2016 is all your hydraulics, which makes no sense that if you're flying a Boeing 747 and they don't use hydraulics, which I don't know, maybe they do, but they only will use APU on my standards for getting rid of fire, or at least in the engines. Basically, there will be a fire bell, APU is usually on the top display on the aircraft. We say APU, and there's like fire or APU online, and then you basically go down here on the 737, and you do this little fingering thing. Then it shows an X right here on the turn off knob, and you turn it off, and it basically shuts off the engine. And then it would say fire, and then of course, fire extinguisher. I have no idea. It gives it dumps water. So yeah, aircraft uses internal pressure, which means that aircraft do have a valve, which means that if you're on a space plane like in 2016, you're able to fly. So the werewolf space plane will keep pressurized all time, but in case if there's emergency and it goes out, that's the problem. We'll figure this out in the future. Well, most likely be very serious because once you're up there in orbit, you should be okay. And if there's a fire, that's not good. So there at least have to be, instead of just these, they come down because usually when you're on an airplane, they will come down once the pressure goes low or some type of thing. And basically they are, forcing you, and the bag don't think it's going to inflate, And basically what it does is keep you from hypoxia. And hypoxia is extremely dangerous. You start to get lightheaded, and eventually, once you reaches about, I forgot the limit of oxygen, you'll start to have hypoxia, which means you pass out, and then eventually you're pretty much screwed. But don't worry. The werewolf space plane, if you manage to put it on, like maybe a bag or something around your head just to make sure, and maybe have a little bit like maybe belts or something around here to make sure it doesn't, like a collar, so it seals from here. But there's one problem, and that is hydrogen bubbles or nitrogen or hydrogen, whatever it is, bubbles inside your body. And when it goes to vacuum, that's serious. You can survive for a bit long, but eventually your pressure inside you will basically bubble up and it will start to boil. Eventually you'll pass out, even though that you have oxygen. So that's why astronauts have a pressure suit, because it, goes in and out, and it also keeps heat insulated and cooling into the body to keep it comfortable. But it's very stiff, but it does work, but expensive. And, so when you basically, people have done experiments, and it's very important to do that. And it has to be like a flight attendant, maybe be like from 2001 Space Odyssey, type one, which would be kind of interesting, like floating in space, and of course seats are there, and it's like, really? So yeah, there will be classes and stuff, or depending if there's rich or business people, like Donald Trump, like on an airplane, or something like that, or Elon Musk, which I never see him. Maybe he does, or like a private jet. So basically, it can be private, commercial, or to say industrial, which means it can carry ore back, but it will only do reduce. But of course, other companies like SpaceX, NASA would definitely help us. And of course, we don't have. So basically, what my idea is to basically get this thing to be built is to use organizations, such as basically talking to a company and donating money, and and hopefully this might work, which means that this is called like sponsoring. However, there is possibly problems to it. Now, if you have to start off being at least a millionaire, and you'll get attention once you're a millionaire, but you won't get but a billionaires will get attention, and they will. Some of them are, mean. Some of them, they just make, For example, the pistachio guy. He drove almost all the water up every single place, and he had a problem because he was doing it for his pistachios. Yeah, wonderful pistachios. I don't think so in California, because basically what happened is, and of course politicians, the government, like, whoa, what are you doing? I think they did fix it, but a lot of farmers were there and their groundwater is gone. And he just like, with a straw, And that's what happened. And he like sucked it up with his, straw. Eventually, government stepped in because no. Citizens, of course, they were like in a drought. And that's why that, if you've been there, you probably had some problems. So, and he doesn't do good stuff like, things like helping others, such as Elon Musk. He did rockets. He tried to help Australia, but they're like, no, you're useless because they're just jealous. And I think Elon Musk is possibly the best man for, well, of course, he's, man that makes the car, Tesla, which, he put in space. And also, he does have SpaceX. So, I mean, yeah. But of course, you got Amazon. Yeah, you got the guy that's Amazon, which is Blue Origin. And is it Jim Bernstein or Jeff Bezos? I forgot. It's one. I mean, one of them is Mr. or one of them, or maybe none. I'm just ridiculous. But well, yeah. Now, obviously, this went to a very weird turn, and I think that I don't think I should be doing these werewolf interviews because it seemed like I basically talked everything about it. And I would love to have a single thing about the werewolf space plane, like a documentary type of thing, like with a very serious voice and a good microphone. And that will basically be the final one. That will be the final one. That will be the final one. And that will be the end. And then, of course, if I have other ideas, I'll throw it in, into the mix, update it a little bit. But in the meantime, this is an early stage development. It's still, I need to add features to help citizens make sure that they get safety. I have to think, not outside the box, but between the box, or at least that in case. Outside the box is basically something else, but inside the box is actually somewhere where the basics is. But in between is the part that needs the most, the things that normally people won't think to prepare for the future. Now, apparently that any other stages of this development is extremely crucial. Now, of course, that this will take time until I get at least old enough. And possibly I have to schedule it to at least 2050 because I realize that this might take a longer time than I expected. Or at least 2030. Well, the original date was 2030, but then I realized because I won't be old enough to be worthy, or at least young enough, or at least going into the space campaign. Either if I design this thing or go into space, which is, this has like a half and half, but obviously, who did I think for? I'm from 2000th century, and I have all of these things. I have almost experience, but I don't have experience in space. I do have the experience of flying, but I don't have experience in real life in space. Unless if I went to one of those 747s and when they're like in a nosedive or something like that, when there's special angle, altitude, I think it's like stalling or something, or safe nosedive, basically a slow nosedive, whatever it is. And you're able to float because you're basically it's the speed where relative to the speed. So basically you're just falling. The entire thing is falling. This plane is falling, you're falling, but you don't notice it because but you may notice once you look out the window and you'll be like, this and that, but you're actually free falling. It's the same thing as if you were falling from, of course, parachuted. But because of the Earth's atmosphere, it basically will alter your thing. And you eventually have to spread out like this. Just like Ralph from Rampage. Like, wolf can fly, one of the things, and do that flying squirrel. It's exactly, but they eventually will tear up because of aerodynamics if you were too fast. So that's why they retract it first. And then once you're at least, but what about, are you going to land? I mean, once you slow down, you're going to go stalling. And you're going to crash the surface. So at least you have a parachute. You need to have a parachute. Parachutes. And then, of course, you have a backup. But of course, in cartoons, usually you're trying to pull a parachute and things come out of it. And actually, how if a parachute was that big, does it weigh much? Like if that parachute was heavy, will you actually start to go like this? Actually, maybe that's why they have like a pack on the front because of weight. Because if you have something on the back, just like the space shuttle, that's why it dangles like this. That's my opinion. And that's why the space shuttle is like this, and it's the boosters here, and that's why it hangs like this, and it stages like this, so the boosters can go up like this, and then of course it will stay like that in orbit, and it will detach, and be like that, but eventually will rotate back over, do inspections, of course. Oh wow! So yeah, I have some good ideas. But of course, I am also making a backup spaceflight, which is a smaller version, but it's unmanned. And possibly this will be used to go to Mars and retrieve the pathogen on Mars to give us the Mars so we can send it back home. And basically, I'm probably need Japan for this for some reason. Every time I think about that, it reminds me of Japan for some reason. I don't know why, but maybe because but of course, a lot of people are making space planes like that. Of course, there is one existing space plane, but this one actually having a big body. It is familiar. It's not my design because it's actually familiar with most designs, such as the Star Clipper, or no wait, Star Chipper, or the Avenger Star, but in a smaller scale. That's why I talked about it, launching it on a SLS, which hang on the side and then act like this special. And actually, has enough delta V to get into more than an orbit. So yeah, this actually is a smaller version. So it's an unmanned, smaller version, but it has a little thing perfect for it. It has hover engines, retro engines, so it's basically going to be like an unmanned spacecraft from Orbiter 2016 style. And the reason why it has a bit thick layers because the fuel, because of course there's hover CS, and it will basically, once it reaches Mars, it does detach with the bus, which will possibly stay in orbit or just enter Mars atmosphere, and then eventually has wheels and it would basically hover and then has 3 engines on the back and would try to use full force and to use as much fuel as possible. And because this thing is small and doesn't have enough fuel, so barely will make it back to Earth. And instead of it, because it has ablator and it will use a little bit of heating, we have to go to the ISS and to be checked out, and it will have to be retrieved. But of course, this thing is viable, and if it fails, that'll be a disaster because we basically spent some money and then destroy that. So maybe we should just use like a little cocoon thing, then deploy it, and then separate it like that, just like the Osiris Rex would do. And a little cocoon thing heats up and gets detached. Yeah, basically. I am sorry, but I have to do this.